Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Slashoom, and today I'm just going to walk you through a quick guide to PvPing on a rogue in Season of Discovery. Okay, we're going to talk about the talents, the runes. I'll go over gear a little bit. Gear's pretty straightforward. And then I'm going to talk about some cool tech that we have, okay? Because rune swapping is actually a big deal and adds some depth to the PvP and a layer to the game that we've never had, I think, ever. Because the gear swapping we can do is pretty incredible. As rogues, we have such good tech on this. I love it, okay? And I'm gonna show you some instances of this and some really cool things we can do, and I'll even show you some macros here at the end of the video, okay? So first of all, there's been a lot of questions about specs and things and different rune builds and stuff, so I wanna go over that first. So let's look at kind of talent setups and things that you can do. We don't have a whole lot of points to work with here, okay? We have 16 points, and that's why you will see most people are going deep into the combat tree, because you're kind of getting the best bang for your buck here, okay? If you want an example of kind of builds and things, if you've ever run a rogue at a low level, like in the 19 bracket or in the 29 bracket or even in the 39 bracket, the 19 and the 29 specifically, you just don't have access to things like hemorrhage and cold blood and some of these deeper talents that you would normally run. And so because of that, you kind of just end up putting your points into one area. So what ends up happening is a lot of times these become kind of mandatory talents. Improved gouge is one of those things that you would just kind of always pick up. There's very rare circumstances where you're going to run something where you wouldn't be running improved gouge. One of the builds would be maybe a Mutilate build that is relying on Deadly Brew. It is viable to run a build that's more of a dot build where you can kind of do some ruptures, you get Deadly Brew and Deadly Poison and things like that. But for the most part, you're going to use Gouge, and that's a great stun, but obviously that doesn't work if there's some sort of dot on the target, okay? That's usually the first 5 points most people are going to take, especially if you're using Improved Sinister Strike. I would say it's even just good to take these points just as a flexibility option. So if you're using Saber Slash, I'm just going to put, we honestly don't even need to put Shadow Strike here, and I'll show you why. But so let's say a lot of people running Saber Slash and Improved Sinister Strike, you would go Improved Gouge. I like to pick up Deflection just because Riposte is so strong. It's really great against other melee, other rogues, warriors, even shamans, things like that. You can, disarm them. And then I like Endurance, and then 3 points into precision. Okay, this is a good all-around build, and what's great about this build too, this build works for PvE. So if you don't want to be respecking all the time and you just want something that's going to perform well in both, this is my recommended spec. Okay, I would even use this tanking. Okay, it's ideally if you were going to use this for tanking, you'd probably take 3 points at lightning reflexes, but with this content, it just really doesn't matter. You probably want to max out precision. This is quality of life. This is a great, just basic combat build. Use Saber Slash, and we'll get into runes here in a minute, but the runes are tied to each spec. But this is kind of your basic kind of Saber Slash build that you would run in any PvP situation. Also a good PvE spec. Now, I have seen some people running like an improved sprint build. This was a very popular build as well in this type of twink bracket, where people would run like a Backstab improved sprint build. It is really good, but for getting out of Novas, gives you that 100% chance to get out of movement impairing effects, which is really strong. We are susceptible to getting rooted and getting kited, and so this is nice, and it does give you 2 flex points as well. Because this is typically run with more of a Saber Slash build, and so you can max out your precision, you can actually put points in deflection, you have some flexibility. You're really just going for endurance, going for improved sprint, and then you've got 2 flex points. You can put them into Master Deception for a little bit better stealth, things like that. But this is something to take note of if you are doing that. These builds. It does work with multiple builds. The only build it doesn't work with is if you're putting 5 points into opportunity for more of that Mutilate Backstab build, which we're going to be getting into next. Okay, another popular build is going to be your Mutilate build, and we'll get into the runes here that would go along with that, but you always take 5 points into opportunity. This is always taken with Backstab builds and Mutilate builds, and we did test this. This does work with Mutilate when you are hitting from the front, so you don't have to be hitting from the back for that. And then you move into combat, you take Improved Gouge, 2 points into lightning reflexes, since we won't be using Sinister Strike, and then 3 points into improved backstab. And you have 3, I guess you could call them flex points, but I would put them right into precision. Our PvP hit cap is 5%, which we're not really going to hit. There is a way to hit it with gear, but you're generally going to be probably about like at 4%. So you can see even with our current gear set, you know, we're at 4% hit chance with those talents. So there is a chance that we can actually miss on our special attacks. So again, I don't want to get too deep into gear right now. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But this would be your basic Mutilate setup. Obviously, be running the rune of Mutilate and some other runes here, which we'll talk about in the rune swapping section. Between the Eyes is pretty mandatory. Rogues are very reliant on stuns. We don't have Cheap Shot. This is our ranged Kidney Shot. And then once we have Kidney Shot, we're going to have 3 stuns, which is going to be a lot of fun. But this is pretty much mandatory. You could swap to Envenom maybe if you were running something there, but I mean, this is just, you're always going to be running between the Eyes. Quick Draw is something that I would actually recommend swapping to, but you can run this mandatory, but you also can run Slaughter from the Shadows, but you actually have some flexibility with the Mutilate build, because you could run you could run Deadly Brew if you want to kind of do more of a dot build. Deadly Brew is actually really, really strong in PvP as well. I like running this actually with like a Shiv build, and you can do some other fun things with that. But you kind of have some flexibility here. Again, these are the 2 runes that you'll probably be swapping between the most, depending on what your build is. And if you have the Backstab build, you'll be swapping between these. Again, we'll talk about a little bit more in the rune swapping section. So that's kind of your basic Mutilate build. If you were running more of a Backstab build, it's the exact same talents, which is cool. You can move you know, between both of those, and then you'll be mainly backstabbing, so you can actually run whatever you want here. Again, since we'll be swapping to Shadow Strike, you don't have to use that. So if you're doing a Backstab build, you wouldn't want to run Mutilate. I'd actually recommend running Shiv if you're going to do a Backstab build, because this gives you something that works well even though it doesn't have Sinister Strike. So what you can actually do with the Mutilate build is do this, and this will reduce the cost of your Shiv. I'm a big Shiv enjoyer, and then you can run between those two. Sorry, not the Backstab build, not the Mutilate build. So for the Backstab build, you could actually run Shiv on this, and this actually helps your Shiv. So it's worth it to put those 2 points in. And then now you got a pretty cool build there as well. And Shiv works phenomenal with Deadly Brew, because you're just going to really stack up poisons really, really fast. So I actually I enjoy Shiv because it works almost like a Hemorrhage, which we don't have. There's a reason the Hemorrhage is so good, and it's because it's cheap and builds combo points fast, and that's why Shiv is so good. I don't have a fast offhand weapon yet, but this works off of your offhand weapon speed. So I'm actually really hoping I can get a fast one soon and see how low I can get the energy cost. I think right now, even on a 1.8 dagger, it only costs 33 energy. That's right about what you have for Hemo, and it feels like that playstyle. It's a lot of fun. I don't see anyone else doing it. Okay, then let's talk about the other component to the Backstab build, which is Slaughter from the Shadows. Okay, so Slaughter from the Shadows is kind of needed for the Backstab build. This is what makes Backstab viable. And what you'll be doing is, you know, typically you're going to open with your Shadow Strike, and then you're just going to be using your Backstab as your main ability. If you can't get behind the target, that's when you can either do Shiv or you would do basic Sinister Strikes. So that's why, again, I do think it is good to go into Improved Sinister Strike with the Backstab build. Specifically, with the Mutilate build, this really isn't needed. That's kind of the 3 main builds that people are running right now. I don't really see anybody running anything else. It's basically the Saber Slash build and the Mutilate build, which I have not seen many people doing that. I've seen PS Hero run it a bit. I played with it a little bit, but mainly I'm seeing Saber Slash and the Backstab build with Slaughter from the Shadows. So that's kind of what I'm seeing right there. So next I'll talk about gear a little bit. Okay, as far as gear goes, basically just general rule of thumb, the best gear you have is what you want to wear, okay? Whatever has stamina and agility. So unlike PvE, where you just purely care about stats like strength and agility, predominantly agility, which Jurassic Wrist Guards would be your technical biz. Mad Wolf Bracers wouldn't be bad because they have stamina. You actually kind of want to go something a little bit more, personally, I would like to go something a little bit more balanced. That's what I recommend. You could just go all stamina, you could just go all damage, but I like to do a balance of both. These are nice because they have a little bit of armor on them as well. So as a general rule, that's kind of what you want to go for. But basically, just get your biz gear. Get your biz gear, get your PvP items, and then go from there. This is the set I would recommend. If you want to get sweaty or swipe and buy Trollbane's leggings, you can do that, but leggings of the Fang are totally fine. Other than that, get your biz. That's it. As far as weapons go, if you're running the Saber Slash build, you would want to use the Hone Darkwater Talwar, or whatever has the highest end damage that you have, which is probably going to be, end up being like a Cruel Barb or something like that until you get the Darkwater Talwar. And then as far as your offhand, I actually like this Vampiric Boot Knife. I don't have it yet. I'm hoping I get it. But this with Shiv seems like it's going to be kind of fun. But this is probably your biz offhand, or maybe this Gusting Wind. It's going to be one of those two options. Sentinel Dagger's not too bad either. If you're running like a Mutilate build, you want 2 Chipped Bites. That is what you want. 2 Chipped Bites is going to be your biz for Mutilate. These are the 2 best daggers in the game for that. You want big, slow, hard-hitting daggers. So that's what you use for that. I have 1 Chipped Bite. I don't have 2. I have that and a Meteor Shard, wherever that is. And those do pretty good. But that's basically it for gear, guys. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. There's not a lot of options. Just get your best gear, and it's going to be the best for both. You can use the PvP helmet, which this is basically resilience. They're giving you reduced damage, just in Warsong Gulch, by the way, to be critically hit. Outside of this, your biz is, I would say, your 3-piece. Your 3-piece is going to be your biz. All right, let's talk about one of my favorite things about playing a rogue, which is rune swapping. Okay, now every class is going to be able to rune swap a little bit, but nobody's going to have the deep tech that rogues can pull off because of the stealth mechanic. So even I guess druids can kind of do it, but even they don't have access to the level of tech we have, just because of the sheer amount of runes and the type of runes we have, which is really cool. So to highlight kind of what this is, essentially it is just item swapping. It's swapping different item sets that have different runes on them. And what I'm going to show you is an old clip from one of my favorite games, which is Dark Souls, specifically Dark Souls Remastered, where item swapping was utilized within very small windows of time. It's a pretty deep PvP game. There's a lot of tech to it, and so there's different abilities in that game, like backstabs and parries, where there's a small window of time where you could swap gear to maximize your damage, or if you were caught in a backstab, you would swap gear to mitigate damage, things like that. So I'm going to show you an example of what that looks like, just to illustrate kind of what we're talking about here with rune swapping. All right, so that clip was courtesy of my good friend Furious Banana, who is still an avid Dark Souls PvPer. But you could see when he was pulling up the menu, he was basically doing the item swapping, which is very similar to what we're going to be able to do here on our rogue. So essentially what you're going to do is, depending on which runes you're running, you can swap things out. So let's just say, hey, you're fighting a mage, and normally you're running Slaughter from the Shadows because you're doing a backstab build. Well, now you could run a second chest piece, and you could swap to your quick draw. So I'm always usually running 2 chest pieces. I think I have 3. I think I've got Twilight Slayers, and then I've got Black and Defias, and then I've also got Tunic Westfall, right? So I got 3 that I can that are pretty much the same, that I can swap through pretty reliably. And there's different ways to do that. I'll get into that a little bit, but I want to get into the tech first, and then we'll talk about kind of actual swapping. Because obviously, you could just pull up your character sheet, and you could click on the bag. I mean, you don't have time for this, okay? You've got to have all this stuff keybound if you're really going to kind of maximize this stuff. So that's one example right there, okay? And you can have different macros for this and things like that. Each item slot actually has a number tied to it, so you can look that up. You can look up the list of what all of these slots are. So for example, the glove slot is 10, and that's what you can macro in. So that's just the basics of it. Now, what makes this so great for rogues is because we have stealth. So anytime you can drop combat and get a re-stealth, now you've got time to do a swap. So based on your circumstances, just bear that in mind, that you should have an alternate leg piece, gloves, and chest piece so that you can do these swaps effectively, okay? Now, some of the tech with this revolves around Shadow Strike, and you might have seen some people talking about this. And what this allows us to do is to run Shadow Strike on a pair of gloves, and then we can use this ability and swap our gloves out, so that way when we're actually in combat, we're using a different pair of gloves. And I'll show you an example of what that looks like. So you can see right now I actually have my Shadow Strike gloves on, and then as soon as I go to use my ability, it's going to go ahead and swap the gloves for me. When I go back into stealth, my gloves are going to swap, and I'm going to put these on. So this is all done with some macros, and I'm going to show you what those macros are now for these swaps specifically, and then I'll go into a little bit more about some of the other macros that I have, and then we'll kind of wrap this up. So this is what you're going to need. So this is your basic Shadow Strike macro. So you're going to put this, basically on your stealth bar, wherever you're going to use Shadow Strike. And what this is going to do is it's going to cast Shadow Strike, and it's going to swap out your gloves. So you actually just want to make sure that the swap is before the cast to Shadow Strike. It's a little counterintuitive because you would think you have to swap after, but as soon as you cast this ability, you are in combat and you can no longer swap your gear. So you actually have to swap your gear before you cast Shadow Strike. But the way things work is Shadow Strike goes off and your gloves swap, which means that as soon as we're out of combat, my gloves are going to change, and then now I can shiv, okay? Or whatever ability. Most people are going to be running maybe Saber Slash, maybe running Mutilate build. Doesn't matter. Whatever you're running, that's how you can swap your gloves. What's also cool about this is you can also use Vanish to do it. So, and I have these macroed as well. So now when I Vanish, my gloves are automatically swapped, and now I'm ready to go Shadow Strike. Now, as you know, Shadow Strike is a fantastic ability. It's a really good gap closer for us. But after it's used, it's not really giving you any value, right? So this maximizes our value. This is some really great tech that we can use. Some other basic macros that I'm using. This is a really good sap macro. This will basically just target enemy players near you. So this is kind of your spammable sap macro, is when you're in stealth. I like to put it on my mouse wheel, and I will just spam this. If I know there's an enemy rogue nearby, I'm gonna actually swap out my gear to my anti-rogue tech gear, whatever you got. If you have a Ring of Shadow Sight, if you have Cat's Eye Goggles, whatever you have, you should also have that macroed to another item set, swap to your rogue finding set, and go look for them and do that. So this is a good macro to get that sap off. This is another good macro for stealth, and what I've done is, because we've already got our Shadow Strike macro working for us, I now want to make sure that anytime I go into stealth, I'm going to swap my gloves back to the ones that have Shadow Strike. So that's what we have here. This is also a spammable macro. So there's two things in here. It's swapping to my gloves that have Shadow Strike, and it's a spammable stealth macro, which means I can just spam this, and I will, if I'm not in stealth, it will put me in stealth. And if I'm already in stealth, it's not going to break. So for those moments where you dropped combat, you're waiting for your cooldown, you're spamming, and you're just trying to get into stealth, you don't have to worry that you're going to accidentally double tap it and come out of stealth. So I actually have a different stealth key bound to a different key, so that way if I want to exit stealth for whatever reason, I can do that. So that's a good macro there. And then I've also, in my Vanish macro, I've also equipped the gloves that have my Shadow Strike. So in order to do this, basically I'm using toughened leather gloves, and then I've got my Void Touch. So just put in the name of the gloves that you're swapping to. Now, you do need two different named gloves for this to work, okay? So if you have two pairs of toughened leather gloves, it's not going to work, okay? So just bear that in mind. In order for this to work, you have to swap between two different types of gloves. They have to have different names, okay? So you can't just use Black and Device gloves ×2, okay? Everything else is, these are all basically just some start attack macros. The only other things of note, I do like to use mouse over macros. I use a mouse over macro for my gouge, and I use a mouse over macro for blind eventually once we have that, and for kick. And what this allows you to do is, let's say you're on a target, somebody's about to cast a spell, I can just mouse over, and once I know I'm in range, boom, it's going to go off. Same with gouge. Obviously I have to be facing them, but most of the time it's like when people are in front of me and I want to gouge a target other than the one I'm currently on, instead of having to tab over, I can just do a quick mouse over, and then that's that. That's pretty much it. Now, as far as if you wanted to swap between bigger sets of gear, like let's say I have a rogue, and like you've got all the stealth sight gear and things like that, the add-on I recommend using is item rack. And what's cool about item rack is you can just basically put in a set, right? So I've got one for PvP, I got one for tanking, PvE, I've got my anti-rogue set. And what this allows me to do is I can actually bind this to any key, and this will instantly swap my gear out. So this is good to use if you're swapping multiple pieces of gear. If you're just doing one or two items, I think it's fine to just kind of bind them. For instance, I do have both of my gloves just here, so that way I can manually swap them at will. Let's say, I didn't want to stealth, or I didn't want to vanish for some reason, and I want to swap to my gloves, I can just do that whenever I want. So that's how that works. But the Shadow Strike tech and the Rune Swap tech is just especially strong with rogues. So make sure you get out there, practice with that, bind those things up, and have a great time PvPing, because it was a rough time leveling as a rogue, but the PvP is really fun, and I'm telling you guys, it's only going to get better. So just stick with it. If you got any questions, let me know. I'm going to show you guys some of these builds and some of this stuff, how it works out in the wild, at a couple clips here at the end. And yeah, let me know if you guys have any questions. See you around.
Sorry, my bad. Hello?
You know what to do. Subscribe for more content.